Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective. Welcome to Behavioral Health Today. I'm your host, Peter Fenger, and today I'm joined by three fantastic guests, Chelli Look and duo filmmakers, Gerber and Jason Gerber. Chelli is a fashion artisan, storyteller, and creative collaborator whose work is rooted in emotional depth and intentional design. After years in luxury retail and leading her own leather goods brand, Chelli transformed her craft into a healing practice, particularly after the devastating loss of her sister to domestic violence. Her journey has taken her from retail floors to artisan studios in Florence, and now she partners with brands to bring stories to life through meaningful design. Joining her are filmmakers Gerber and Jason Gerber, a husband and wife directing duo based in Los Angeles, known for their award-winning film Otis Dream, which was shared by Oprah and recognized by President Obama. Jason and Blue specialize in emotionally resonant storytelling across film and commercial work. Their latest documentary, Dusk, captures Chelli's personal story with care, beauty, and a deep respect for the healing power of art. In this episode, we'll discuss their film and explore how grief can be transformed through creativity, how art becomes a vessel for meaning, and how Dusk became both a portrait of loss and a celebration of light, memory, and resilience. Chelli, Jason, Blue, welcome to our show. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much.
We're glad to be here.
Definitely.
I know in your film, Dusk, you tell the story of Chelli as a leather bag designer of CHC in your creative process, but it's also a story about grief after death of Chelli's sister, Megan, and Chelli's healing journey and the transformation that comes with creating meaning and a legacy from the use of her creativity. I'm using my own words to describe it, but I'd love for you, Jason and Blue, as the creators of the film, to share with our listeners your own synopsis of the film.
Yeah, so Dusk is about Chelli Look, and really we are picking up in a chapter of her life where it's been about 10 years since her sister was murdered, and she has just launched a new bag collection from her business called Dusk. And we pick up with her in this season of time where she's both launching the collection and is also kind of processing through some things creatively and business-wise. And then she's also kind of in this almost like a turning of a corner of this chapter of grief that she's journeying through. And so all of those things are kind of going on all at once. And the film is about the intersection between grief and art and how we can pour ourselves out through our art.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. I really resonated with your film, and I thought that it was a very powerful piece on a human story. Yeah. Chelli, I'm curious, for those new to your work, can you introduce us to CHC and your journey into leather bag design and how that began?
Of course. Yeah. So CHC was the bag brand that I had, the leather bag brand that I had it was full-time from 2013 to 2019. It all started when I was in high school, and I would play around with the sewing machine here and there, just doing little projects. But there was one specific day that my older sister Megan had come home from high school, and she had created a messenger bag in her home ec class. And I was just really intrigued by, I just hadn't thought about like, oh, you could actually like make a bag or you could make clothing. Like it just kind of sparked my mind in such an intrigued way of like, it's a really amazing thing to do. And so I asked her, like, would you teach me how to do it? Like you just learned how to do it. And she kind of like, figure it out yourself. And I essentially did. I had a very simple design in my mind that I wasn't able to, from a monetary standpoint, able to purchase, but I also couldn't really find what I wanted because I wanted something very simple but highly functional. And so I asked my mom to take me to the fabric store, and I found some denim and some cotton, and I figured out how to make a bag because they didn't have the pattern that I wanted. And I didn't even know how to use patterns anyway, so it wouldn't have mattered. So it was just a matter of figuring out how to make this thing come to life. And after carrying it around high school, I had friends inquire about it, I had teachers inquire about it, secretaries, and I just became the girl at school that was making bags for people. And it was not only a fun creative outlet for me to be able to create these new pieces, but it was also a point of connection with people that was helpful for somebody who's very introverted and socially awkward. That it just gave me this like an open door to be able to talk to a variety of people I wouldn't have otherwise. And it grew a passion within me to really take this bag thing to another level. And so I wanted to go to fashion school, ended up in Chicago going to Columbia College, but they didn't have the specific design path that I wanted. So I did general retail visual merchandising, which I actually later went into full time, but I was always still crafting the bags on the side. And it kind of came to a crux a couple of years after college where it was like I was doing retail full time. I was doing the bags on the side. And it was a matter of, talking to my husband of like, should I just take the leap? Should I just try this? And so we partnered together on it and I went full time. And it was a wildly complex, difficult, amazing, joyous, nuanced experience that I'm very grateful that I had. But that brand full time concluded in 2019.
Yeah, yeah, and I can really see that attention to people's experience with your bags. I know that the film does a really wonderful job of you sort of explaining the functionality as well as the intentionality of it.
Yeah.
And I enjoy your story so much because I find myself as a creative person, and that creativity is a gift. And when we're able to sort of bring it out into the world, good things just sort of happen. So for you as sort of maybe a an introvert, being able to sort of connect with our communities in that way, it's such a gift.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Blue and Jason, I'm curious, what first drew you into Shelley's world? And how did Dawn Dusk evolve from, I know it began as a short piece, but it actually evolved into a multi-year documentary. How did that happen?
Yeah, so we are commercial film directors by trade, so we that's our bread and butter. And it was 2016, and little maker docu-style short pieces were very popular. Commercial agencies were asking for that kind of work, and people were like watching those kinds of things online. And so we were like, well, let's get something like that in our portfolio. And we were kind of looking for that. And through some circumstance, we were invited to an open studio that Shelley was hosting to launch her new collection, which is actually was called Dawn Dusk. And we walked into her studio and we were kind of, I don't know, taken back, I guess, with the sort of beauty of the space. It was uh, very all white. Her bags were all black.
At the time.
At the time, the designs were really beautiful. Just the energy in the room really got us. But then, getting to see Shelley, she was like the most magnetic person in the room as well. And so we were kind of immediately drawn to both her and her work and thought, this is very suitable for video. Like, we'd love to see if we could maybe do something. So we approached her that night and said, hey, we'd love to make a video about you. What do you think? And she said, let's get coffee. And a couple days later, maybe later that week, we were getting coffee and we asked her, how did you get started doing this? And Shelley, you answered telling us the story of your sister and how she was murdered. And you talked about how she was, how you were giving 10% of your proceeds to Wings, and how you were, Wings is a domestic violence shelter, and how you were also volunteering there. And that really, like, our jaws were on the floor hearing that story. It was really unexpected. And we were, frankly, just very surprised and didn't quite know what to do with that information. And it really wasn't the answer to our question either, at least on the surface, it wasn't. And so we were left curious.
Of like, what
How'd
are
you
you
get started?
doing?
Yeah.
How'd you get started?
So
Yeah.
we were left curious, I think. And so, we talked some more about filming and we started and we popped in for a day here and a day there to get some B-roll and set up an interview question day. And then we kind of kept doing that and then kept doing that because there was always so much more to the story to tell and to see. And maybe a month or so in, Blue and I had a conversation and we approached Shelley and we said, hey, what would you think about this being a longer form piece, potentially a feature? Because I think your story is rich and it's important. And the more we're learning and the more we're seeing, we think that it can be a powerful story for people to hear. And Shelley said yes. And so we started filming, and we like to say we kind of accidentally made a feature-length documentary is kind of what we like to say. But that's what drew us into the story and
Yeah.
kind of how we ended up
It
doing
was
this.
it was really like we just realized, oh, this story, to be able to tell it well and to be able to like honor the story, it needed to be whatever length,
Yeah.
it needed to be. And so we wanted to open that up to, feature. And then as we kept filming, we realized like, yeah, it really is going to be a feature length piece.
Yeah. It's interesting when you guys sort of, share your experience and sort of evolution of the film, in that as the viewer watched, I had that same experience. I was so drawn in by Shelley's bag, and then to discover the story behind it was something so much deeper. So the same evolution that you guys had, I experienced that in the film. It's very interesting.
Mm.
Good.
And I'm kind of curious about sort of that approach of storytelling. You guys are telling a story about grief and creativity and transformation. How did that sort of evolve? How did that come into sort of this story of Shelley's experience?
Yeah. So I think we began by really focusing on her business and on her
Mhm.
as an artist. But then as we kept filming, just the way that she was trying to honor her sister and her work with wings and just the journey overall that she was on really was like permeating into every aspect of what she was doing. And so it was like you couldn't not like dive into it more. You couldn't not like film it. And so we began to kind of ask more and more questions. And I think really it was when she started talking about the inspiration behind her bags that we started to open up a little bit into that deeper processing of, the healing that was going on. And we saw this really beautiful metaphor, I guess you could call it, happening where she shared how she was really inspired by sunrise and sunset, dawn and dusk, for her collection, Dawn Dusk. And but then when we kept asking, well, why? Why are you inspired by sunrise and sunset? Then, she shared, well, it's because I go and I watch the sunrise and the sunset. And we're like, well, why did you go and watch the sunrise and sunset? And then, she began sharing about, well, because it was really the only faithful and consistent thing in my life during a really dark time where everything else around me felt very untrustworthy. And, this idea of sunrise and sunset being this faithful, consistent thing in her life. And so that's when we began to see, the connection really between the processing of this loss into the designs that she was creating. And we thought that was really beautiful.
And so, like, from a practical standpoint in filmmaking, what we started to do pretty early on was try to reflect Shelley's aesthetic, her vibe, her art, her values back into the filmmaking process. So
Mhm.
there are simple things like, Shelley, you want simple but highly functional. So, something that reflects that way is that we used only prime lenses. We never use a zoom lens. That's never something complex like a zoom lens. If we want to get closer to the subject, we have to physically move the camera. And then in terms of like lighting and the look and the color, we wanted to reflect all of Shelley's aesthetic and her work and in her personality back into that creative approach. And so those are things that we tried to do throughout that kind of informed us from a technical perspective, and then kind of also started to weave its way into the story perspective as we started to sort of even things like what I think we're going to talk about a little later is how grief is not linear, and our film is not told in a linear way. It's not told in a linear like a fashion. So I think that even those things reflect back into the filmmaking.
Yeah, yeah, you guys managed to balance a really beautiful human story and a really courageous healing journey with some very beautiful cinematography that shows off the intentionality of Shelley's bag designs. And even just beyond aesthetically pleasing bags, you guys take the extra opportunity to really present it in an environment that kind of communicates that concept. It's quite beautiful as you know, as you view and watch this film.
Mhm. Yeah, I
Agreed.
think that it's it's w- you know, we really treat the bags as art, and so we try
Yes.
to present them.
Because that's what,
Yeah.
in the first like 10 minutes of the film, you hear Shelley say, to me, fashion is art. So we always wanted to present fashion as art.
Yeah. And so we try to present them that way, in the same way that you would have like an artist in a gallery. Only for us, bags are wearable art, so we put them on models and
Mhm.
we
Right.
put them in a functional space.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful presentation. Shelley, I know that the death of your sister by domestic violence is a huge turning point, not only for your life, but narratively in the film. But I'm curious about how did grief initially impact your relationship with the creative process? And
Mm.
then maybe on the other side of that, how did creativity aid your grieving?
I think that those are pretty interconnected. For me, I utilize creativity in the processing of all emotion. And I think most people do, honestly.
Yes. Mhm.
I just maybe identify it more, put that language to it. But specific to grieving, I mean, I've even heard songwriters talk about like, going through some of the darkest times is when some of the most potent lyrics can come out. And
Yes.
it's the ability to, you need a way to process and to get out what all is stewing inside of you, for lack of a better terminology. And so Dawn Dusk came from just like a specific season of grief. And there were different collections that I've had throughout my time as a designer, and each inspired by a different season. And this one just happened to be brought about by what felt like a dawning from this grieving process. And I don't think there's ever an end point to a grieving process. I think it just evolves. But for me, what felt like for me a giant leap in healing and in hope helped inspire this collection. And I felt like I'd sort of turned a page in what the grief was like. And so wanting to get out and wanting to express what I felt like was going on internally for me. And so I attached myself to some of the things that carried me through that season, which was Dawn Dusk. It was that faithful thing. So pulling on what carried me through that season, some of what carried me through that season to inspire this story I wanted to tell. Because even in the film, I mentioned I'm not a literal designer. And so for me to sort of tell a story from a design standpoint about grieving my sister isn't going to come out. To me, it comes out through a piece of that story, which was Dawn Dusk. It doesn't come out like anything specific to my sister. And so for me, it was a matter of the creative process just aided the grieving, but also it helped tell the story of where I'm at in the grief. And so it takes on dual roles to me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's beautifully woven throughout the film. I know your journey, you spent time volunteering at domestic shelters. How did hearing those other survivor stories sort of shape your healing and perspective? And how did it help find meaning?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that I wanted to support something in the capacity to honor her, because at the time where my company was prior to the collection, I wasn't giving to Wings, but
Mhm.
as I released this collection, it was needful in my mind to have something that honored what could have been going on.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm a generous person, but I don't like the idea of just, and I don't think there's anything wrong with this, but I didn't feel right for me to just put money towards something. I wanted to put myself towards it. And I think that was for a couple of reasons, in that I think it's really healthy to get outside of your own bubble of life and to experience the stories of other people. I've found that not only does art and creativity help me process grief, but so does serving, because it takes me out of just realizing, the world isn't just about me and the problems that I'm facing. There's a lot more going on. But in that exchange of serving and hearing other people's stories, it was helpful for me. And for the few people that would ask me, why of all of the problems in the world are you spending your time here? It gave an avenue of being able to share. And I think many people would understand and even agree with the fact that when you can share part of your journey, it helps heal it a little bit more. So my time there was very humbling, because it wasn't a lot of talking, it was a lot of listening and a lot of journeying with. And knowing that most of my days were spent serving and creating something for mostly women, but then for a few hours in the week, I got to serve mostly women in a completely different capacity. It kind of brought my two worlds together without me feeling like I was bubbled in.
Yeah. Yeah. It is the hero's journey. You had an experience that asked you to go outside and experience something. And from that, from your work with the domestic shelters, created this meaning that allowed you to connect to something larger. I think that's incredibly beautiful. And I also feel that creativity can be sort of that source for you to sort of link all of that together is a true gift. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't even realize how much I would need that experience with them. It was just a matter of taking that extra step of serving and giving back, but then to realize how much I actually gained through that experience is
Right.
invaluable.
Yeah. Forgiveness is a huge step of your emotional journey that's captured on film. And to even kind of quote you, you use the message that grace is a free gift. Talk to me a little bit about how that understanding helped you begin to release some of the heaviness that you were carrying.
Yeah, grace. Yeah, my understanding of grace is I feel like it's way limited. I feel like it's an eternal concept that we try and capsulize in our temporal understanding. But when I say it's a free gift, it's because I don't believe that I stepped into forgiveness of my own ability. I don't believe I did it at all. And I'm speaking from my experience because I don't think that of myself I could profess, speak over any type of forgiveness with that particular circumstance. And so when I say that grace is a free gift, I felt empowered by God, which is what I believe grace to be. It's getting something you don't deserve. Grace is the ability to do something beyond yourself. And for that part of the healing journey, to be able to forgive, I believe that God invited me into it when I believe he invited me into praying over my brother-in-law because I did not initially want to do that. And then the ability to actually release him and forgive him, the experience of it felt almost like an out of body experience because I know myself. I know my thoughts. I know what I wanted done to him. I know when I'm wronged where my mind can go and where my heart can go and how dark it can get. And so to have the ability to release and let go from the inside out was an experience way beyond me. And it had to be way beyond me to actually do it and to live in a place of peace as a result. Because prior to it was not peaceful, it was anything but. And so to be on the other side and to experience peace, I, that was something outside of myself, which is why I point to grace because I believe it was a gift from God to enable me to do something that he was asking me to do.
Yeah. Wow. To be able to sort of connect with a higher being in that way and be open to receive that is a profound shift. Again, to catalog all of that onto film is it's an incredible experience. I know it means a lot to be able to capture that on film, that there is so much preparation that takes place on account of Jason and Blue in order to create a safe space to allow such vulnerability. I want to ask you, as the filmmakers, Jason and Blue, there is a clear sense of trust and consent in these interviews. How were you able to create a safe space for vulnerability on both sides of this camera?
Well, I think it helped that we did have a little bit of connection with Chelli before we started filming, so we weren't like absolute complete strangers. Um, but looking back, I don't think we did this necessarily intentionally, but when we began filming with her, we really started pretty broad in our discussion topics and our questions, and we would have kind of these really long interviews with Shelley, and she somehow stuck through them. I don't really know how, but we'd have these like 3 hour long interviews with her simply because we just had so many questions. And, like we mentioned earlier, there were so many different aspects of the chapter of her life that we were kind of witness to, that we just had so many questions. There's so many things to talk about. And so in the beginning, we started with pretty broad questions. And I think that really just allowed space to, just discuss and like connect and laugh sometimes. I remember that at one point Jason asked her like, what is the meaning of art or something like
Yeah,
that?
something like that.
And Shelley was like, are you kidding? Just like really broad kind of unanswerable questions that lead to discussion. But as we continued to film with her, those questions began to get more and more specific over time. And we eventually moved into the more intimate questions and discussions around grief and around the murder and around just what she was experiencing. And so I think it really helped to kind of have that broader beginning and then ease into this more intimate kind of place, which, just created space for all of us, for all three of us to kind of feel comfortable with each other and to, get a kind of routine and rapport with each other as well. And
Sure.
just, yeah, create that safe space. I think something that's really important to us and something that's being talked about more and more in the film community, actually, in the documentary community, is the importance of consent in documentaries. Unfortunately, in the past, there's been a history of, people not having consent when making documentaries. And there's, even in some of the film festivals that we submitted this film to, one of the questions that we had to answer was, do you have permission from your subject to be sharing this, which I think is wonderful.
And or how do you intend to care for your subject after the film's release?
Yeah. And so, and that's something that was really important to us when making this film, was to always check in with Shelley and say, is this okay? You don't have to answer this question if you don't want to. And just always ask for consent when sharing a person's story, especially one that is as deep and vulnerable as Shelley's.
Yeah, I think that that's a beautiful process. It's also very hopeful to know that there are changes like that happening within the film community. It creates a lot of responsibility on behalf of the filmmaker's part.
Speaks a lot to them, though, having done it way before it's even become like a flagged thing, though. I would certainly commend them and the character of who they are, given that this project began almost a decade ago, and that was just speaks very highly of them as directors and the thoughtfulness and presence that they had in general.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I know as filmmakers, you try and let your subject do the talking, but as editors and storytellers, you guys are trying to take that narrative and craft it into a film.
Yeah.
What preparation did it look like for you guys to not bring in your own narrative? And was there any work you did emotionally to tell Shelley's story?
So I think filmmaking is like a lens for empathy. So one of the things that I think that is a value of ours is letting the story kind of dictate the creative choices and the artistic choices, like we talked about, like reflecting it back into the story. But I think that we as filmmakers in the room, as much as you want to be a total fly on the wall, I think that you do have some effect into the space that you're in. So we try to be cognizant of it and to minimize it and to like, if knowing that we were gonna like that we're there and that had we not been there, I don't think the story would have changed, but it might have looked a little, the path might have been slightly different. I think, Shelley, you would have probably ended up in a similar place eventually. But I think, you've talked about how like it was like 3 years of therapy with us as we asked you tons and tons of questions, and you got to process maybe a little bit more out loud than the average person. And but all of that doesn't take away from the authenticity of the experience that I think you were having, Shelley. And we really tried to just ask questions and to not lead you anywhere, and to, even though we might have been making observations and having maybe insight into something that you hadn't quite put into words yet. I think that we tried to not lead you there or lead you somewhere on behalf of the story. And so we didn't know what film we had. We didn't know what the ending was going to be. In fact, before you make the choice to sort of close CHC and close your business, we had paused filming, sorry, and we were editing and we were trying to find the story and trying to find the ending. We had a lot of the pieces, but we really didn't know where the film was going to go and how we were going to end it, and we were struggling to find it. And then so when we get the call from Chelli that says, "Hey, I'm actually closing CHC," we said, "Oh, okay, that's a surprise, but also maybe let's just see where again being
We're
like,
like, are you okay?
yeah, being patient and good listeners. I think we realized, oh, we need to pick the camera back up. We need to go and film that process, and that actually gave us the ending to the film that was the most authentic possible, because we really were able to capture a particular season from start to finish, and that your story goes on, Chelli, like everyone's story goes on, but we often ask the question as filmmakers, like, why this story now? And this version of this chapter that we wanted to tell was very specific as part of your process, and we think it's a valuable and important thing for people to hear, because it's an untold component of what I think in our society so often we focus on, the justice being served, but we don't talk about, well, how do you remain? How do you persist? How do you go on after the fact? And that's what our film is about. It's about that grief process, that healing process. And that's what this chapter was. And so I think we really tried not lead you anywhere. We didn't try to force you anywhere. I've worked in my early career in like unscripted and reality television, where it is actually pretty scripted, and the producers are trying to lead you somewhere. And we didn't want to do that. So I think in terms of preparation and how we approach things, it really just was being thoughtful with our questions, being good listeners, being slow to react, and to often just take information home and then kind of think about it and figure out how we want to present it visually later, so that we weren't leading it anywhere. And I think that led to like an authentic experience with the whole chapter of that.
Yeah, and I think it was also like, we're mostly narrative filmmakers, actually. Like we're probably not going to make another doc after this. We've we've always loved writing and telling stories, and so it was very much a new experience for us, and one that we had to do some learning along the way of realizing, like, oh, we really can't just direct her of what to do. Like, we really need to just follow. We have to follow and we have to listen. And so kind of making that conscious choice, that conscious decision of, observing where is this going and trying to like follow along with it. That was, something that we really did like consciously do. And then I think, then we would, like Jason mentioned, we'd have these discussions of, where we would observe the story to be going.
Yeah.
And then when we kind of got a sense of like, I think we're seeing this in Chelli's journey, then we were able to kind of bring those observations to her. And then that like, kind of opened up more aspects of that for her to share about.
For instance, when we go to the lakeside and we do our little, what we call a walk and talk, it's about 40 minutes into the movie, we had been seeing more and more the real depth and meaning that sunrise and sunset had really been having in your life. And we said, hey, we want to get up at sunrise. We want to go on a walk on the lake. And if you want to do a run beforehand, so you're kind of in some of your normal routines, great. We'll meet you there. And we'll walk and talk on camera, and we're going to ask you about light. So if you could just think about what light means to you, that's a very broad thing, but you're a thoughtful and introspective person, so you came with a lot of thoughts, and we just asked questions, and that's sort of how we would do things. We would be like, we're seeing something, let's go and talk about it. And in that case, we were like, let's talk about it in this environment that is meaningful to you itself, or right at sunrise. So that was something that we that was an example of something that we would do to kind of bring in our approach, but not lead the story anywhere, but just sort of say, here's something we're observing, let's talk about it.
And one other thing I just wanted to add about the ending of the film, I do think that place that we were sitting in of feeling unsure of how to end it, I think it was because Shelley was still in
Yeah.
process. So,
Mhm.
it only made sense that, of course, we couldn't figure out where it was going because it wasn't done yet.
Yeah.
Like, there were still things happening.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Americans are increasingly concerned about mental health, with nearly 9 in 10 voters seeing it as a crisis. Mental Health First Aid provides crucial training to identify, understand, and respond to mental health and substance use challenges. Gain the skills and confidence to offer life-saving assistance. We offer courses for individuals, groups, and organizations of all sizes, including specialized training for veterans, law enforcement, EMS, and educators. Visit mentalhealthfirstaid.org or email hello@mentalhealthfirstaid.org to schedule your training and make a difference in your community.
Yeah, I guess one of the things, as I sort of observed the film, was that it did ring authenticity through and through. And I can tell in your explanation the restraint that you guys offered for your own sort of narrative or production of the film and really kind of letting things unravel. It's funny that you guys sort of mentioned that, this might be your last documentary that you produce because narrative is just so important in having your own voice, but it really creates a strong skill set to be able to let those things kind of unravel on their own. I know that you guys have sort of given me the why behind the ending. And if I can sort of, offer my own opinion, it gave me a sense of openness rather than finality, right? Again, it comes off very human. But I want to ask you, as sort of the filmmakers, creatively, what do you make sense out of Shelley's story in that point in the film?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think what we tried to show in that ending was hearkening back to the sunrise in Florence. And you hear it in the last little bit where Shelley's talking in the film. She says, for her, this is not a dusk for her, but it's the pink in the sky. And so that's hearkening back to Florence when we were watching the sunrise.
Yes.
And, we see that little pink come in first before all the other colors come up. And so I think for us, hearing that was really encouraging and really like exciting. When we were filming with her, we were kind of being invited into like being excited with her for whatever this next chapter was going to be. And
Yes.
we really tried to show that in the film that, that this isn't like a sad thing. This is an
Mhm.
exciting thing. It's kind of like when you finish a book and you finish that last chapter and you close it, and it's like sad because you have to, say goodbye to whatever story you're just reading, but it's exciting because you completed it and you get to move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And so that's really what we were seeing in this moment with her, that we were seeing, oh yeah, she's like come to the other side of something, and it's not necessarily, it's not necessarily like the end of something, but it's like that chapter's done and we're moving on to the next thing.
We
And so,
screened the film for
yeah.
a number of
Oh yeah, we did.
people as we were making the movie, and
In the
in the
editing
editing
process,
process.
yeah.
And one of our friends said, "This is like really a film for artists." I think it's a film for a lot of people, actually. If you're experiencing grief or loss, or if you are
Running
an
a
artist
business.
running a business, there's a lot of themes that you can lean into. But one of the themes is like, if you, from an artist perspective, he said she didn't need CHC anymore, and she didn't need that season anymore. And I think that's really powerful to sort of acknowledge something that you put a ton of time into, to go, oh, this is complete. I think it's very brave.
Mm.
We're, I think, still like stigmatized a little bit by maybe a prior generation's sort of, we do the same job for 30 years and get our pension and retire. And there's value in that. I'm not dismissing the value in that as well. But I think, especially as creatives and as artists, knowing when something's complete. For us, it was, when do we know the film is done editing? We could have kept nitpicking, but we had to choose, this is done. So I think that is a really cool component to see it like sort of happen live. And I think that it can be really impactful, like for people who maybe are feeling stuck creatively to go, I maybe don't need this version of creation anymore. I'm going to do something different. And I think that's really
Yes.
cool.
Yeah, yeah. And to sort of echo what you're saying, there is a moment as a creative where that possibility of opportunity is the excitement, right? It's not necessarily the transition of pivoting. That's the important part. It's the opportunity that happens after that moment. And there is a moment when I was watching where I was very sad to see Shelley close down her studio, but you did a very good job of showing the possibility and hopefulness
Mm.
of what lies ahead of all of that. And you can see that, the CHC brand is going to live on in other ways. And that's exactly how creativity sort of evolves, right? Sometimes we get these moments in our life where we have to change in our career, but that's sort of the beauty in that. Again, it kind of harkens back to this beautiful humanistic story that you guys are telling. And it also really shows the authenticity of your filmmaking style of this is really her story. And, we're not trying to put any bow on it. We're really trying to present this as it is. And
Yeah.
so, yes, it's really beautiful to see it sort of unveil in that way.
I'm so glad you connected with it that way.
Well, then I want to ask each of you, what did this project teach about your own emotional landscape, and what has it shaped that you want to create moving forward?
I have a couple of thoughts. I will say, before I answer that question, I do just want to say I actually hope that Jason and Blue endeavor to do another documentary, only because to be able to hold a story well requires hands and character and creativity that I don't think all filmmakers have. But yeah, I think that they have something really beautiful within them to be able to do. So I actually really hope that the opportunity presents itself. And I don't think it'll be as long of a process. But
Yes.
Maybe your
anyway,
your next business.
yeah, maybe we'll talk. Give me a promo video. From an emotional landscape, you know, I go back to my first experience of seeing the film, and I've shared this with Jason and Blue because they were like, what'd you think? Because I honestly didn't know what to expect. They did a brilliant job at being flies on the wall in many instances. So there were a lot of moments within the documentary that I was like, oh, I didn't realize that was even caught. Or certain interviews, there were many moments of surprise for me. But what felt like a gift to me, and I told them it felt like a gift, is that the season that I was in when they were filming, seasons for me or any of us can be a couple months or a couple years. That season of my life was a couple years, and it was a vibrant, prolific, creative, incredible season. For me, that season ended very difficult from another circumstances set aside from all of this. So when I would reflect on that season, it was marked by how it ended. So to get to witness on film, not just by memory, but on film, get to revisit that season, it reminded me of like, oh, you shouldn't just recall that season by the hurt and the ending. You need to remember the season as a whole, because there was so much in there that I had forgotten about because I was just so focused on how it transitioned or how it ended. And so to be able to see it on film was like, wow, what a gift to go back literally and sit in those moments and hear from those people. And so from emotional landscape, that has caused me to be in a state of reflection to other seasons that I have, that the highlight is the hardest part of it. But to dig a little deeper and say, but what else was going on in that season? What else can I sit with? What other emotions did I get the ability to explore or dive into or feel? And so it's really changed my mindset on how I process moments in life.
Yeah. Yeah. A few thoughts around that. One is that you had a very unique opportunity to participate in a medium that allows to be your mirror. And by being able to see your life sort of reflected back in a different way, maybe through the eyes of really clever and beautiful editing, you can see your story rewritten, in that way to where you saw it as a whole. And it gives you an opportunity to sort of question some things and rewrite, what does that story mean to you? And I think that it's a really beautiful process and a gift that Jason and Blue has offered you.
Very much so. I'm very
Yeah.
grateful.
Yeah. Jason and Blue, I want to ask you, what do you hope viewers carry with them after watching Dawn and Dusk? Especially maybe those that are navigating grief and looking for their own healing outlet.
I think you can find yourself in a lot of places in this story. And I think if you're open and you're paying attention and you're willing to listen and you're willing to kind of put yourself in Chelli's shoes and then sort of see what kind of matches up with your own circumstance, I think that there's a lot of, for lack of a better word, like a lot of humanity going on, a lot of like just the overall human experience going on in this film. And I think that you can find something that you can take away that like is meaningful to your own life. And I think there's an undercurrent of hope in all of that. Finding something that you can take away for yourself is that you might relate to some dark component that Chelli is talking about, but then you get to sort of see her go through a journey that leads towards hope. And I think that you can then go, oh, I've just watched somebody get there and I don't feel like I can get there, but maybe I just have a little bit of extra knowledge that if someone else can do it, then I can get there to that place of hope. So I think that it's kind of broad and wide, but I think that that's genuinely true. And I think that a careful watch, an empathetic watch is the best way to watch this movie. And I think you can kind of find something for yourself in there. I know you have some thoughts too.
Yeah. I mean, I think definitely would echo that. I think just watching Chelli's journey and her process and hopefully being encouraged by it and hopefully being inspired by it. And even some of the ways that she kind of entered into that light, maybe considering some of those things for like your own journey. And hopefully that will be, helpful for anyone who is currently sitting in a dark place. And then also I think that just the reminder that dawn is coming, that there's always a new dawn, and that if you are feeling stuck in something, there's always a new chapter. There's always, the next iteration of whatever it might be. You don't have to be stuck in something forever, which is something I reminded myself a lot during the 9 years that we spent making this film and, working on the same thing for a long time. Although there was always, new things throughout it. It's like just relating to that idea of being faithful to the chapter that you're in, but remembering that there's always another chapter coming. There's always a new dawn.
Yeah. Well, it's a beautiful, human, resilient movie. And I thank Chelli for giving us an opportunity to peek into your life. And I thank you, Jason and Blue, for being the ones to sort of bring it out to the world. So thank you very much. But before we go, I do want to ask you, where can our listeners learn more about your film and to support your causes and creative work that you're involved in now?
Yeah, so the film is out. You can watch it. There's a where to watch page on our website, but I'll just give you a highlight. This doesn't apply to every region in the world, but you can watch it on Tubi for free with ads. You don't even need an account. You can rent or buy it on Amazon. You can check it out on the Roku channel. A couple other services, Fossum and Ganjing World have it. You can rent it on Verizon Fios as well. And the best way to keep up with us is on our website. You can sign up for our newsletter.
DawnDuskFilm.com is our website. And we have a newsletter that we send out semi-regular updates from. And then on most social media, we are at Dawn Dusk Film. So you can find us there too.
And if you watch it, find us on our socials or somewhere.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear what your experience was with the movie.
Chelli, Blue, Jason, I really appreciate you all being with me today.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Good to be here.
And I want to thank you, our listeners, for taking the time to join us. You can follow us on our social media at Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube, and more at Behavioral Health Today. If you like our show, please give us 5 stars and leave us a review. As always, the resources for this episode and an archive of all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. And we look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today. We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.